Okay, so the YAML file needs to be updated so that we can have dynamic values in our Kubernetes YAML file. Let me go to the scheduler service. So we have the application YAML file, and within this file we have specified, let me rename this to be a YAML, though it works, but it's good for a naming convention. And within this we have the two profiles. One is the default profile, the other one is the dev profile. Okay, the one with the default profile, I'll be updating the URLs and the other properties like the data source URL, username, driver class name, so on. And this will be used or specified, the values will be specified within the deployment YAML of Kubernetes. So let me first update this. The way to do that is we just have to specify, let's say I'll get rid of this, and it'll be dollar data source dot URL dot URL, and this would be data source URL. This would be username. This would be password. This would be the driver. I'm specifying this. This should be none. Show format SQL. This is okay, but we don't need it to be there in the when we deploy it to the server. So this would be a JPA DDL. Again, this will be a JPA format SQL. And this would be JPA show SQL. Now, all of these, the values for all these placeholders will be specified in the Kubernetes YAML file. And if we take a look at the deployment YAML file that we'll be using for putting the application into the database. Oh, wait a minute. We also have an Hazelcast, right? So this has to be Hazelcast cluster name. This would be Hazelcast. Let's call it host. Let me call this as host. And this would be just port, Hazelcast host and Hazelcast post. And this has to be his host, and this would be port. The same has to be updated into the application config. Has to be host, and this needs to be port. All right, so this has, again, it goes as host, and update this in here as well. Yep. And if we take a look at the deployment YAML file, so usually what a Kubernetes is that Let me take an example. Now you have a pod. Okay, you have pod, then you have a deployment, then you have a service, you have a config map. This has to be service. There is a config map associated to the pod. Then you have a Nginx, a load balancer, and the one that I'll be using is Nginx. Okay, so the way it works is you have a pod. The pod is the container. The pod contains the container and the image that is deployed, which is running. In our case, it will be a Spring Boot jar, and this pod exposes certain ports so that it can be accessed from outside of the container, and it is specified in the spec part of the pod within the Kubernetes YAML file. Now, in order to specify how many pods you need, that information is specified in the deployment of Kubernetes YAML file. And deployment is also responsible for specifying how many resources do you need. Wait, let me check this. So you have resources. Okay, so the resources are part of the pod. Okay, that the reason for specifying a resources is that how much memory it would take up, how much CPU it would take up, and all of that is specified into the pod. And then you have deployment. The deployment is responsible for specifying what would be the the update strategies, how many pods do you need, and all that stuff. So it has the replica set. The deployment has the replica set. So this has, let me put it down. This has port information. Then you have resources. This has the replica set along with update strategy. Then the service allows access to the deployment. The service is a sort of a connection to the deployment from the like, if the outside world wants to connect to the deployment, service is the go-to guy. So in the service we specify the deployment name, the port that has been exposed by the pod, the port that has been exposed by the pod. So in this case it can be like the the service port as well as the actuator port. And again, it goes in this. I've specified that, hey, the service will be running on this port and the actuator will be running on this port. So, but still, the service does not allow access outside of Kubernetes. And in order to have access outside of the Kubernetes, we need a load balancer, or it is also called as an ingress. Okay, let me call it as ingress, which needs to be enabled based on the type of Kubernetes that you'll be using. So in my case, I'll be using microkits on my server, and let's say the pod has certain config parameters that are being passed as the properties, okay, to the YAML file. So in our case, I'll be using these properties. One is connected to the JDBC and to the Hazelcast server and certain JPA formats. So in order to deal with them, I have specified a config map, which is a part that I have put into the pod. Okay, so let me draw this out as well. Hmm. Okay, and so this holds the properties. Okay, and this holds the deployment name. Okay, so if we take a look at the YAML file of scheduler service, so let's start with the pod. Okay, the pod is a part of the deployment, as we can see over here. It starts with the spec and with the container, and the name of the service should be scheduler service. So this can be taken up from this part over here, as we have specified. So the artifact ID that is being specified in the pom.xml is being used in here. So you got this, and hence will be able to download the image from Docker Hub that we have already uploaded. So this becomes this, and this will be scheduler service. Okay, we got the service port running on the one that we will be using is 10,020, and the management port would be 10,021. So this goes application YAML deploy YAML, sorry, and this is 21. Okay, so and the resources that I'm specifying here is that it should use a memory of 1 GB along with a half CPU. I want, yeah, half CPU is enough, or it can go to 5, 1/4 of the CPU, and it should limit to 0.5. That is enough, and 2 GB of memory. It's not even required 2 GB. I would say let's make it like yeah, 1 GB is enough, and even limit to 1 GB. 512 MB, you get 512 MB, and this will be 512 MB as well. I don't want to give more resource to it. And image pool policy is always, that means it will always pull a new image and env from the config map reference, which is this, and I want it to be named as scheduler service config. So this picks up from here. So you specify the API version to be v1 config map and the scheduler service config. Now this is important. Whatever name is being specified over here has to be over here as well. And we specify the Hazelcast host to be this, the port, and the cluster name, which all of these values are being specified in the YAML file. Okay, Hazelcast host, port, and cluster name. If I'm not wrong, hope they are the same, because they have to be the same. Let me split this file. And if I open deploy.yaml, they have to be the same. So let me check it once. Okay. And got username, the password, data source driver, JPA DDL, JPA format SQL, JPA show SQL. Yep, they all match. So this goes pod, and the config map now comes to the deployment. So the deployment has to be, this has to be scheduler service DEPL, and this, the names are important because they'll be used in the service, and the service names will be used in the Nginx. So the strategy that we'll be using is a rolling update with a max available of 25%, and surge will be 25%. That means 25% of the pod should be available. And this goes as scheduler. Okay. Then the same name has to be copied and put it into the service. And this goes as scheduler. Now the port is important. If I have exposed this port, same has to be put over here and here. Again, the same 21 and 21. So these ports, okay, so the name of this service will be used in Nginx, and the ports that are being exposed by the service will be used by the Nginx, which is the ingress or the load balancer, whatever you call it. So sometimes I would call it load balancer, I would call it Nginx, or I would call it ingress. So these three names are synonyms. And this sounds good. And we'll see the deployment in the next video. Thanks.